My name is Dr. Nathan Cole. I'm a field researcher in comparative folklore and anthropology. For years, I've traveled to places that most maps forget. Quiet towns, abandoned mines, and stretches of desert where the wind carries stories older than the language used to tell them. My work isn't about proving legends true or false. It's about listening to the people who still believe them and understanding what keeps those stories alive. Every region has its own vocabulary for fear, its own explanation for the things that move at the edge of the firelight. In March of 2013, I set out across northern Utah to investigate a series of unexplained reports. Lights in the basin, missing livestock, voices carried on the wind. Locals said the ground itself seemed to breathe after dark. I kept a notebook, a recorder, and a camera. What follows are the entries from that week, unedited exactly as they were written. They begin in the Ute Basin, with something the locals only whisper about. They call it the Skinwalker. The arrival. 10th of March 2013. The storm had rolled in from the desert long before I reached the basin. Lightning flickered behind the mesas like flashbulbs beneath a sheet, and the road had turned to pale dust that hissed beneath the tires of the Land Rover. The vehicle was older than I was, olive drab paint dulled by years of sand and rain. Rear seats stripped to make room for steel boxes, and a single lantern swung from the rack, throwing uneven light across the canvas roll, and a dented typewriter wedged beneath folded maps. I parked half a mile from the ranch gate and let the engine tick itself silent. No birds, no wind. Even the cooling metal seemed too loud. In the reflection of the windscreen, I caught my own outline. Waxed cotton jacket, scarf pulled high, hobnailed boots crusted with red dust. Across my shoulder hung a leather satchel, rain darkened and stitched back together more than once. Inside, binoculars, torch, gauze, compass, and a small notebook bound in leather with a broken clasp. I still tied it shut with cord. A man's life in fragments, enough to rebuild a memory if I vanished. When you spend enough nights alone in forgotten places, you begin to sense their weight, the way air holds a kind of memory. Out here, that memory felt awake. I opened the notebook and wrote beneath the last page from the Icelandic dig. Field Journal Day 1, Ute Basin, Northern Utah. Objective: document reports of light phenomena and nocturnal disturbances. Local term referenced: Inaldlushi, Skinwalker. Approach observation only. The torch beam caught a spiral carved into the gatepost in a pattern still used in old Navajo wards. Fresh paint crimson against the dust. The wind moved once, carrying the faint scent of sage and something metallic. I stepped through, closed the gate behind me, and for a moment the world held its breath. From somewhere beyond the ridge came a sound too deep for an animal, too soft for thunder. It rolled through the sand and stopped at my feet. I reached for the recorder, thumb hovering over the switch. Field log 0112 AM. Audible resonance in low frequency, possibly mechanical or atmospheric. A voice answered through the static, low, distorted. My own voice. Don't open the gate. I froze, and when I looked down only to see that the recorder was still off. 11th March 2013. By morning, the wind had dropped, leaving the desert still and colorless. The Land Rover sat beneath a crust of red dust, tires half sunk in sand. I brewed coffee over the paraffin stove, rolled a cigarette, and checked the compass, northwest toward the basin where the reports began. Locals spoke of shapes moving along the ridgelines, figures that ran on all fours until watched, then rose upright and vanished into the rock. Cattle mutilations, missing pets, half-heard screams. Folklore always blooms where isolation meets fear. By midday, I reached the dried creek bed. Tufts of sage clung to the banks, and the air carried a strange metallic tang. When I pressed my palm to the soil, the vibration I'd recorded the night before returned. Faint but rhythmic, like a buried pulse. Field Journal Entry 3. Subterranean vibration persists at 9-second intervals. Unknown origin. Could indicate geological faulting or mechanical resonance. No visible installations in area. I climbed toward the ridge. Halfway up, I found 3 posts driven into the ground, bound by strips of hide. At their center hung a stone carved with the same spiral from the gate. Flies swarmed, though there was no decay. When I turned back, a dust-covered pickup was idling by the track. The driver stepped out, tall, wiry, sun-creased, Eli Hargreaves. He'd left a message at the Moab post office after hearing I was the Brit asking about stories. "You'll want to keep to daylight," he said, squinting at the ridge. "Nights ain't right out here." I told him I'd heard the same. He spat dust, nodded once, then added, "June'll have coffee on. Follow me back. We can talk where it's warm." Eli's ranch lay 2 miles south, a low house of weather-bleached boards and a porch bowed by wind. June Hargreaves met us at the door, small and neat, her hands red from dishwater. She poured coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe and spoke without looking up. "You're here about the lights." I nodded. She glanced at her husband. Eli leaned against the post, arms folded. "Voices carry at night. Sometimes dogs won't go near the pens. One of ours went missing in January." He stared into the fire. "He sees things, he always has, but lately it's getting worse. Some nights we still hear it barking. Same tone, same spot out by the well. Only thing is, there ain't a dog out there." June crossed herself. "They wear what they kill," she whispered. "That's how they come close. The preacher says it's the walkers again." I asked what she meant. She hesitated, eyes on the flames. "They wear skins that ain't theirs," she said softly. "Used to be medicine men before they turned. Once they taste it, blood, power, they can't turn back. You don't say their name out loud. It draws them." Eli nodded. "If you see eyes out there, don't shine a light. Makes them come closer." He handed me a crude talisman, bone tied with horsehair and red string. Old way of keeping rum off. Doesn't always work. When I left, the sun was sinking behind the ridge. June called after me, her voice barely rising above the wind. "If you hear your own voice out there, run." I drove back toward camp, her words circling in my head like the wind in the basin. 12th of March. That night the wind died completely. The air hung heavy with the smell of sage and ozone. I set camp at the base of the ridge, close enough to see Eli's ranch light flicker against the horizon. The Land Rover's engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound for miles. I marked coordinates, wrote down Eli's account, and rolled a cigarette from the tin. The ember glowed faintly, a small red eye in the dark. At approximately 2:14 a.m., movement. Not wind, not animal. Something pacing the edge of the creek bed. I killed the lantern. The night turned absolute, only the faint shimmer of stars overhead. Through the binoculars, the ridge shifted not light, but in the absence of it, a shape darker than the rock. 2 eyes caught the starlight. Amber green. Too high for a coyote. Too narrow for a man. Every instinct said move, but I stayed still. Field log 2:17 a.m. Visual contact. Unknown bipedal subject. Must be 2 meters tall. Eye reflection consistent with feline tapetum lucidum. Behavior. Tracking. The figure straightened, its outline bending the air around it. When I flicked the torch, it vanished, as if erased mid-movement. A low whistle followed, drawn out and deliberate. Not mocking. Calling. By dawn, I found the tracks. Human at first, then narrowing, claws digging deep into sand. The trail ended at a scorched patch of stone, smooth, black, and warm to the touch. Field Journal Entry 4. Thermal residue suggests high-energy event. No fire damage to vegetation. Possible electromagnetic discharge. Later that morning, I drove back to Eli's ranch. He was already outside, eyes on the horizon. "You saw him," he said flatly. "Something," I replied. He nodded once. "Don't bother trying to catch it on film, they don't show up right." I asked what he meant. He walked to the fence, thumb hooked under his belt. June took pictures once, came out blank. White like the sky ate the image. He didn't say anything more after that. 13th of March. At first light, I packed up camp and headed north toward the reservation border. The track wound between red cliffs. The radio hissed like breath in an empty room. Every few miles, the compass needle spun, then steadied again. By noon, I found a derelict gas station. One pump. A mural of a coyote sun-bleached to a ghost. Inside, the air smelled of oil and dust. On the counter, a cracked map showed 3 circles drawn in red pencil. The largest sat exactly where I'd made camp. A voice behind me said, "You shouldn't be here." He was tall, gray-haired, wrapped in a denim coat with turquoise beads at the collar. He introduced himself as Thomas Bigay, retired lawman, Dine Nation. Said he'd worked these lands his whole life and never once slept easy. I told him I was studying acoustic anomalies. He gave a short laugh. "They're not acoustic," he said, "they're hungry." He crouched, drew 4 intersecting lines in the dust and brushed them away again. "There are words we don't say, old ones. They answer back." When I asked what kind of words, he stared past me toward the ridge. "Names. Once you speak them, they remember you." We sat in silence a while. Wind scraped through the open door. Somewhere far off, a crow called once and didn't call again. Before he left, he handed me a tobacco pouch. "Roll one before dark," he said. "The smoke keeps them guessing which world you're in." That night, back at camp, I developed a roll of film in red torchlight. The last frame showed the ridge where I'd seen the eyes. Behind the rock, something tall and blurred, half turned toward the camera, outline warping the air around it. Field Journal, Entry 7. Image distortion exceeds normal lens aberration. Possible electromagnetic or thermal interference. Humanoid outline present. I wrote Bigay's words beneath the frame. "Names remember you." Outside, the wind shifted and the radio crackled once. Not static, but the sound of someone breathing. of March. The storm rolled in 2 nights later. Lightning cracked across the mesas, throwing veins of white through the black sky. Wind screamed through the ravine, carrying sand like knives. Inside the tent, the air buzzed with static. The resonance monitor, a crude setup of copper coils and a salvaged analog meter, pulsed in rhythm with the thunder. Each strike drove the needle past its limit. But between strikes, a steady frequency held 19 hertz, too low to hear. Low enough to feel in the bones. I'd recorded the same tone once before, years ago in Cappadocia. The monks there believed it opened gates between worlds. They were half right. At 3:03 a.m., the hum deepened. The Land Rover's headlights flickered. The key wasn't even in the ignition. Then a single heavy footstep outside. And then another. I unzipped the flap, torch in hand. Sand whipped through the beam, forming spirals before dissolving again. No footprints. Then faintly the radio crackled to life. My own voice played back, reversed and slowed. It looped once, then stretched into a whisper that barely shaped words. The resonance meter shattered. The tent folded inward as if the air itself were breathing. When the wind finally eased, the sand was smooth again, except for one set of tracks. Barefooted, leading away from camp into the darkness. By dawn, the desert looked untouched. But every recording device I owned, camera, radio voice log, had drained to zero, as though something had fed. 15th of March. Morning brought silence thick enough to feel. No birds, no insects, even the air seemed hollow. I drove into Shiprock for supplies and answers. The radio tower on the outskirts stood dark, cables swaying loose in the wind. A small diner sat across the road, lights dim. A hand-painted sign reading, "Open if you need us to be." Inside, coffee steamed black and bitter. The waitress nodded, said nothing. I took the back booth and started writing up the night's notes. Half an hour later, 2 men entered. Both in plain clothes, both carrying themselves like they'd forgotten how to blend in. They didn't order. They just watched the window. When I stood to pay, one of them spoke. Dr. Cole. He said it like he wasn't sure. Field researcher, resonance patterns, asking locals about legends. I didn't confirm, didn't deny. He flashed a card too fast to read. That ridge is under department jurisdiction now. Environmental hazard. His partner added quietly, "You might want to pack up your equipment." I asked what kind of hazard. The first man smiled thinly. Something contagious. They just walk out without saying anything else. When I looked out the window, their SUV was already gone. No dust, no tracks. Back at the Land Rover, I recorded a brief note. Field log, 20:42 p.m. Unidentified officials observed in field area. Possible retrieval or containment operation. Recommend future access under alias. Local testimonies consistent. Voices in the sand. Eyes in the wind. Subject aligns with global shapeshifter folklore. Entities wearing skins, loss of identity, resonance at low frequency. I paused, rewound, and added one more line. Thomas Begay, missing since dawn. The wind rose again then, carrying what sounded almost like a name. 16th of March. I couldn't leave. Not yet. Whatever haunted that basin wasn't finished, and neither was I. The compass spun each time I thought of driving south, so I turned back north instead. By midnight, the storm had returned, dust sweeping in sheets across the headlights. The Land Rover's engine growled low, straining against the wind. Every breath carried the taste of copper. At the base of the ridge, I found the 3 posts again. The hide that had bound them was blackened now, shrunken to cords. The carved spiral still hung between, faintly glowing as if alive. I touched the stone. It throbbed once beneath my fingers, warm, rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat. The recorder in my pocket switched on by itself. Through the earpiece came a chorus of whispers, layered and wrong. Then the stone cracked clean in two. A sudden rush, the sound of feet circling the truck, dozens of them, light and fast. The engine coughed, stalled, then roared back to life on its own. The dashboard flared red. every gauge maxed out. I turned out and saw them, figures in the sand shifting like smoke, half-formed. Faces that changed shape when I blinked, human one heartbeat, something older the next. One stepped forward, head cocked, voice carried on the wind. "You look too long." I didn't move. Neither did they. For a moment, the desert held its breath. Then the wind dropped to nothing. I don't know how long I stood there. The shapes swayed against the Land Rover's lights, their outlines rippling like heat over asphalt. The only sound was the pulse beneath my feet, steady, alive. The nearest of them spoke again, though the voice wasn't sound but vibration. Each word pressed behind my ribs until thought itself felt foreign. Images flashed torches on the ridge 100 years ago. Men wearing wolf skins, their eyes pale with dust and blood. A circle of fire. A scream swallowed by sand. Field Journal Entry 11. Phenomenon visible to unaided eye. Entities manifest between pulses of electromagnetic activity. Emotional state, detached. Observation remains priority. The ground trembled. Pressure filled my ears until vision fractured into white. When it cleared, the figures were gone, replaced by columns of stone shaped almost like men. A wail rose from the ridge, mechanical and alive all at once. It sliced through the storm, through thought, through the small part of me that still believed in silence. I stumbled back to the Land Rover, slammed the door, and turned the key. The headlights carved twin tunnels through the dark. For an instant, the desert moved. Sand lifting in ribbons, faces forming within, mouths opening and closing in reverse. The hum shifted again, 19 hertz. The resonance of fear. Then nothing. Stillness so complete it felt like the world had stopped spinning. When I looked down, the recorder was still running. Through static came my own voice whispering. Not everything wants to be remembered. The recorder clicked off. I sat for what felt like hours, engine cooling, until dawn began to pale the horizon. The ridge was silent again, the sand smooth. No tracks, no evidence, nothing. Field Journal, final entry. Entities appear to act as vessels for memory, sustained through frequency and observation. Interaction risk remains high. Recommend further study via remote instrumentation only. Do not engage directly. I packed the equipment, sealed the notebook with cord, and turned south toward the highway. The radio crackled once more. A man's voice, low and almost kind. "Keep the light burning." I couldn't be sure, but it sounded like Bigay's voice. I didn't look back. I left the Ute Basin before sunrise. The storm had passed, but the light felt wrong. Too even, too pale, as though the world had been washed clean. The air smelled of ash and cold metal. At a service station outside Moab, I stopped for fuel and coffee. The clerk stared at the Land Rover as if he recognized it from somewhere but couldn't place the memory. He asked if I'd been through during the storm. I said yes. He nodded, looked out toward the desert, and muttered, "Thought so. Radio's been dead for 2 days." I handed him a roll of film for developing. The last I'd shot before the power drained. When I came back an hour later, he set the packet on the counter, unopened. "There's nothing on them," he said. "Every frame's just white, like the negatives were overexposed before you even loaded them." Outside, wind moved through the fuel rigs with a sound almost like breathing. That evening, while checking the storage crates in the back of the Rover, I found a reel of tape sealed inside a canvas pouch, labeled only Basin 17/03/2013. I didn't remember packing it. When I played it back through my headset, I heard only the hum. Oh, steady, barely audible. But every few minutes the frequency changed, almost forming words I couldn't quite understand. I keep the reel in a tin box now under the driver's seat. Whenever I open it, the air inside vibrates, so faintly that I might mistake it for imagination, or for something remembering me back. Filed 17 March 2013, Ute Basin, Utah. Dr. Nathan Cole.